Welcome to the Turnaround Talk Show and Podcast. I'm your host, Marcia Tepperman, the creator of the Turnaround Method. And in this show, me and my guests will have fascinating conversations on how to use adversity as a springboard to create a thriving life. Today, my guest is Tulsi van der Graaff. Tulsi is a former lawyer with a psychology, mediation, and counseling background. Over the last 8 years, Tulsi has been working as a workplace trainer, facilitator, a presenter, and a coach. She worked for the Human Rights Commission as an investigator and mediator in discrimination and pre-marriage counselor. Welcome, Tulsi, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I wanted to talk about workplace conflict and how to turn things around in the workplace when there is a conflict. And I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about this topic than you.
Oh, well, that's lovely. Thank you.
And the focus that I wanted to have today is on how we as individuals can manage ourselves, because that's the only thing that we can really control, is how we respond and how we show up. So that would be the focus. But before we go there, I wanted to talk to you about what are some of the most common conflicts that you see in a workplace from your experience.
Yeah. You see a whole range of conflicts, and I mean, sometimes it's difficult to even work out where it started because they've been going on for a long time, but often there seems to be a conflict related to unclear expectations, different kinds of ways of working, different personalities, kind of entrenched thinking about the way something should be done. And other times there's, I guess what we'd call ineffective communication. It's quite usual to see people haven't really learnt the kind of communication skills that strengthen connection. And so they may say things in a certain way that causes hurt to others. And then that's left unsaid, and it can create often a spiral of disconnection and issues between people. And the other sort of layer upon that is often people don't actually raise those issues. And there seems to be a general theme that people avoid talking about conflict, and it gets worse.
So let me go back. The first thing I think I heard you say was around expectation and not clarifying expectations. The second thing was about people having their own ways of doing things and clashing because they do things different and don't understand where others are coming from. Yeah. And communication, sort of keeping things and not addressing. And then resentment because that sort of is not addressed, and then it gets worse.
Yes.
That kind of the gist.
Yeah, it's a good summary.
And it happens between co-workers. It can happen like at all levels, right?
That's right. Between managers and staff, between team members, between a staff member and the manager's manager. It can also happen with customers and clients and staff. So in every sort of situation, there are potential challenges and opportunities as well.
Okay, so what do you think is a good mindset for us to go into the workplace and have a positive experience? What is like one thing you would say, just like as a blanket statement to anyone when you start a new job? What would be like a great frame of mind to go into interactions in your workplace?
That's a good question. I think for me, one of the biggest areas that I feel sad about when I go into workplaces is that people aren't clear about expectations and their role and what a successful job looks like. So for me, what I would say to anyone who's going into a workplace, to avoid any potential conflict that comes from say, feeling like you might be encroaching on someone else's position, or a manager starts feeling disappointed in how you're delivering in the job, is really have one of those very open conversations where you say, look, can we have a look at this job description? I'd really like to understand from your perspective what those expectations are. And also, you know, for you, what does a successful job look like? Say, day to day, can you talk me through that? And I think that's a really good sort of starting point for open communication and understanding.
One of the things that we talk about in Gallup Strengths Coaching, one of the good questions is like, how can you support me? It's like, it's a really good question to ask people in job interviews, right? I had this question asked because my workplace adopts a strengths-based culture. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. You know, just the fact that I can say, this is how you can support me. That was amazing. And sort of like also be really clear about the things that are going to make you miserable if you have to do that too much as well, right? Because oftentimes you don't clarify, and then you end up doing a whole lot of mundane things that you didn't expect. And even in the interviewing process, you might want to ask about those things, so you don't go into a job as well thinking that's going to be one way and ends up being the other way, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I like that idea around support, that idea of saying, you know, kind of like, what does support look like for you? What does support look like for me? And having really focused conversations around those, that kind of, how do we do this together? Because two people will always do things differently and have a different idea of support. I mean, it's really interesting. Sometimes I see that you know, like one employee really needs, you know, a lot of sort of appreciation and feedback about how they're going, and another one finds that almost uncomfortable. And so we need to clarify all those bits, all the nitty-gritty that we don't necessarily expect would create conflict, is often the stuff that creates conflict because it's unsaid and unclear.
How about even knowing what's important for you in the job, like more in terms of your values as well? Like, some people like to have control over what they do, autonomy and things like that, and other people like to be told exactly what they are expected to do. So just clarifying those things can be helpful, you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. You know, it can be from, you know, I actually really like to, you know, meet up with my manager every week because that gives me a sense of where I'm going, and I can check in and I can tell you how it is. And another one might be like, no, I'd just like to send you an email and let you know how I'm going, and can we meet up once a month, because otherwise I feel like I'm being micromanaged. And finding a common sort of ground. It was really interesting because I was speaking to and two staff members when I was doing some sort of coaching work in a program. And what I saw with them was interesting, that there was a source of conflict, and it was simply about the fact that one person liked to have meetings where, you know, you had 20 minutes to say, how's the family and how was your holiday, and, you know, have a bit of a chat. And the other person was like, a meeting that goes longer for 10 minutes is too long a meeting. And so you can imagine the kind of conflict that could happen in between those two. And through just a conversation about, okay, how do you like to do meetings, there was this kind of enlightened experience of, oh, okay, we're that different. How do we come up with a common way? And the common way was really, okay, let's have shorter meetings, but let's make sure we give, you know, 2 or 3 minutes just to have a check-in. And that's a good way for us both to feel kind of like our needs are being met.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important to sort of be mindful of those individual differences. That's something that we also really focus on, Gallup Strengths Coaching in the team framework. One of the things I wanted to ask you is about toxic workplaces or toxic people in workplace. Tell us a little bit about how that can impact the general well-being in the workplace, and the number of situations and conflicts that you have to address around this?
Well, I liken it to a beautiful clear glass of water that has a drop of poison put in it. It spreads everywhere. And it's really unfortunate that you see it in so many workplaces. I mean, we often, well, this is a term coined by my business partner, call them, dangerous at work. And they're those people that, when we're talking about dangerous at work.
Dangerous at work.
Yes. Yes, so the dangerous at work people are the ones that you have to be really careful with. And so, even when we're like discussing communication techniques and ways of resolving conflict, there's another category when we're dealing with the dangerous at work. And they're potentially the ones that you can't expect an inverted commas reasonable response from. So it can be extremely challenging. And the way that we deal with it is, you have to go back to basics. And the biggest challenge with often with toxic behaviours, or in really inappropriate behaviours, and I guess we might say toxic people, although it's a hard one to say, because for one person, you look at a person and you say that person's a toxic person, but they're in a dynamic with someone else. So we've got to be careful with that sort of terminology as well. But what we see is that often behaviour is just allowed to persist. So we've gone into workplaces where perhaps someone has avoided or ignored or been really awful to others, even for 10 up to 17 years, actually, we've seen. And I know it's shocking. And what needs to happen there is you can't go from saying, okay, I've accepted this for 10 years and today I've decided no more. You need to actually go back to the team and reset expectations around values and behaviour. And what we do with that is usually when it's that challenged, and we've seen some devastated workplaces, it's really sad for the people who are often, basically having sleepless nights, crying, absolutely just suffering, and it's awful. So what we have to do then is really, you start from scratch, and we do this activity called above and below the line behaviours, and get the team to be involved in clarifying what is it you want from each other and what is it you don't want from each other. And you get that common agreement, including with the people who may be more challenging. And then you develop leaders so that they can call out those inappropriate behaviours. You also develop the staff to be able to say, hey, that's a bit below the line, or I'm not going to accept that. And there's something about also giving people permission to speak up, which is a really important one. And I'm constantly surprised how few people feel that they have the right to speak up. And recently I've been doing a big coaching program, and I had 3 different people I was coaching come back and tell me that they'd clarified their job in a better way, that they'd spoken up, that they had that difficult conversation. And all of them in some ways said to me, it was because you gave me permission to speak up. And I thought, yeah, that's so powerful, but also shocking as well.
Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit more about that. So I want to let's park the how to speak up. I want to hear your tip on how people speak up, because I know this is a big one. I know that people keep bottling up and keep it, and then we're going to talk about the behavior. Like, I don't know how long after that behavior happened, it just becomes a complaint rather than feedback, right? So I want to park that, but I want you to talk about what is below the line, kind of below the line behavior. I see it like as a two-way, right? This could be internal and could be external as well, right? Can a person feel below the line and take something that isn't below the line as below the line? So talk to us a little bit about what below the line could mean, and in terms of what's acceptable, and also how we interpret interactions.
Yes, okay. So I think maybe what you're getting at, in addition obviously to exploring the below the line, is that idea that sometimes we can define things as below the line, if we're having, say, an interaction with someone else, almost manipulate that to say, well, that's below the line, but really it's just a conversation. So sometimes we see that. But so if we talk about below the line behaviour, it's behaviour that we don't agree with. That's inappropriate and not okay. So that's anything from some of the common below the line behaviours are gossiping, ignoring, kind of creating this kind of in group versus the out group. Being dismissive, basic things like eye rolling, being doing the yes but continually in meetings. Another thing that we see, sort of getting back to that toxic environment that you were sort of mentioning, is that in those kind of cultures that often one or two people have stopped saying good morning and goodbye, and that is such a below the line behaviour as well. People don't know how to address it, and challenge for staff in those sort of situations is their value is to say hello and goodbye, so they either keep doing it and get rejected and ignored, which grinds them down, or they are inconsistent with their own values and stop saying hello and goodbye, and either way it's an awful scenario. So they're the kind of below the line sort of behaviours, as well as one of the other ones that's like really, really significant is avoiding dealing with conflict and not being being unwilling to engage around a discussion to resolve issues.
So what's your suggestion on how to address a below the line behavior? And then next I'll ask you, how do you then, if it's not on the spot and there is an issue, because I know most workplaces policy will say you have to address the conflict with the person before you escalate that to management, right? So I want to talk about the instant feedback, so that feedback on the below the line behavior, and then I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how you address those conflicts that you have been refusing to address. If you could share with us your wisdom.
Yeah, okay. So I think there's a couple of points in relation to that. Look, I think it's, in an ideal scenario, we can have those open conversations with others and we can raise issues. I mean, I definitely agree with that. However, when we're talking about really inappropriate behaviours, there is a point where that is really a leadership response, and it shouldn't be the person, the individual person who has been the, I guess, experiencer of the bad behaviour. And I think there's probably a line, and it can be a very confusing line because we sometimes it's a really good thing to raise an issue, and other times it may not be. So, for example, say if there was like a little small interaction where one staff member said something to another, and it was either experienced in a hurtful way, intended or not. Well, that would probably be something where, if they have a foundation of trust and relatively good communication, it might be, hey, can we just have a chat? The other day when we were in the tea room and I said this and you said that, that hurt my feelings. Like, is that what you meant? I was just checking with you, and hopefully that would be, oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it like that. What I was, I think I was a bit under stress, so I probably sounded more dismissive than I meant to be. So that could be something, where we can have that conversation, and that builds understanding and connection. So we're happy with that one. And there might be other ones where a person tends to be very challenging in their behaviour. Perhaps they refuse to work together with someone, or they don't follow instructions, or they're just like quite rude in their behaviour. And if that's something that's already been happening for a while, it's in some ways it's unfair to expect the next person who experiences it to address it when it's actually a historical thing that needs to be dealt with by the manager. And that's where, for me, often there is a problem. And there's often a problem with supportive managers who are lovely, beautiful people, but don't know how to deal with really challenged situations other than being supportive and understanding. And in fact, it needs a bit more of a clear, this is not appropriate. And so that's where, if you set the below the line behaviours and really clarify them, then the manager can say, hey, we agreed to these behaviours. We said, this is what we want and this is what we don't want. And I'm seeing a below the line behaviour, and, let's talk about, what the story is here, because that can't continue on like that. Or someone could say, say someone in a smaller sort of situation, hey, that's a bit below the line. And then the person goes, oh, okay, that's true.
I love that one. I love that one, because it also, it's not personalized. It's just like, this is what we agreed. And I feel, because also this the perception of someone, right? Some people are a little bit more outspoken. They're a little bit more direct. And there's the multiculturalism as well in the workplace. A lot of people from different backgrounds, they communicate in very different ways as well. And that can come across as below the line sometimes, depending on how used you are to speak up in your culture as well. So there's a little bit of that as well. But I like when you say like, oh, this was a little bit below the line. Someone could say, oh, sorry, I didn't intend it like that. So it just takes, it's not personal anymore. It's just something I perceived as below the line as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because I was facilitating like a whole team session a little while ago, and there was quite a number of challenged people in that large team, and we did above and below the line behaviour activity, and someone came up to me about 40 minutes after we'd done that, and there'd been a break, and they said, oh, I just overheard someone starting to talk about one of the challenged people. And the person they were talking to said, hang on, I think that's below the line. And the person went, oh yeah, oh okay, I guess I better not say that. And then they stopped and they moved on. And I thought, isn't that amazing? Like it can be as powerful as 40 minutes later, once you've set those expectations and you've clarified them, people stop themselves. So that was good. And the other thing, just coming from what you were just raising and talking about, that sentence of, oh, that's a little bit below the line. Another thing that we give to people as well as a sentence when things are challenging is, I'm not feeling comfortable with this conversation. So can I stop you there? I'm not feeling comfortable with this conversation. I do want to work with you, or I do want to talk with you, or I do want to sort this out. I just need a few minutes, or, can we come back and, have a cup of tea and we'll talk about it again. And, what that does for people is sometimes amazing, in the sense that, so when we are not used to speaking up and raising issues, we can often go into that sort of fight, flight, freeze mode where we feel under threat. And so we can't think. That experience where, 20 minutes later you think of the best thing to say, in response to something, you're like, damn, now I can't say it. Well, that kind of opens up an opportunity where you can do that. And so saying I'm not comfortable with this conversation, it means that you don't have to say why it's a problem. You don't have to say how you feel. You don't have to call out the behaviour, but you're really putting up sort of a boundary saying, I'm not prepared to engage in this way right now. And I will talk with you, but not like this. And it forces the other person to reflect their behaviour as well, which is really what we want. We want that reflection, and we want to be treading a bit carefully in the way we engage with others, because, whenever we say something hurtful, whenever we don't take care in the way we communicate or spew out our challenging emotions, we create disconnection and hurt and resentment, which is the thing that creates conflict.
So what I'm hearing you say is that validation is really important. So in a group situation, setting sort of the ground rules for what is for everyone below the line. Because if one person perceives something as below the line, and they might be well speaking for someone else who didn't have the guts to say, this is below the line, I feel that that's below the line as well. So it's validating everyone's kind of ground rules, and then operating within those parameters helps reduce conflict. And as well as stepping out and then understanding that what you said or what you've done, it's not acceptable for the other person, so that you have to come back and and have a different way to continue that interaction, the way that is more acceptable.
Yes, and I think that the really important part combined with that is having all those agreements that everyone's part of, then also making sure that managers call out that behaviour, and that, you know, team members don't accept things when it's directed at them. So, you know, that you know, once there is that sort of foundation of understanding and the kinds of behaviours that we want in this team, when something sort of comes up, hang on, that's a bit below the line. Hey, we said we weren't going to do that anymore, or, you know, we have to be careful. And sometimes I liken it as well to, you know, you're on a rickety bridge, and the more conflict that you've experienced in your team, the more rickety your bridge is. And so every step you take, you have to take it with care.
Wow. So, Tulsi, let's say someone has had a minor grievance with another team member, and that's sort of going for a little while, and you didn't address. The other person is kind of, you know, walling, like raising all the walls, and you feel like you're starting to feel uncomfortable. But it isn't that kind of inappropriate behavior that is so bad yet that needs to be escalated. How would you suggest that the person who wants to seek resolution, or who needs to say how they're feeling, presents that to the other party?
I love that question, because I think it's a really significant one that people do experience in the workplace. And I've got a bit of a go-to sentence for that one as well, which is something like, you know, hey, you know, I've noticed that things haven't seemed sort of the same with us recently, or there's been a bit of tension between us. You know, has there been something that I've done to upset you? Just opening that up, what that allows is, you know, the person can potentially say, oh, actually, you know, it's nothing to do with you. I'm having a really hard time at home. Or actually, you know, 6 months ago in that meeting when you said whatever it is, that really upset me, and I haven't been able to get over it since. And so it opens up the opportunity to have that conversation. The challenge with that is it does require the other person to be, you know, willing to open up. So I think different times there is success with that. That person might go, you know, well, everything's fine. And then you might go, well, it really doesn't seem fine, you know, and then it might be an open question, you know, we go and have a chat and maybe talk about how we can, you know, move forward together, and, you know, what would make a difference for you in sort of our working relationship. I really value you. That's the appreciation, but I value working with you and how you contribute. So I don't want us to kind of, you know, lose the strength of this working relationship. So it's, you know, opening up the conversations.
It requires a high level of vulnerability just to approach someone from that place as well, and not sort of want to be right and to bring all your complaints to the table. That's what I'm hearing from you. So if you're not really now going to create the opportunity to list all the times that someone has done something wrong to you, it's really kind of about setting a vision for how we can be better from now on, rather than, and clearing what happened in the past, what has happened, but not so much about addressing that, but also kind of setting a future vision for a better relationship.
Yeah, I think, I mean, at different times there definitely has to be those conversations, but I mean, that focus on let's work together, you know, how can we work together well, I think it's really important. I mean, at the same time, like I've worked in organisations where really the only way forward was for each person to be able to say what was upsetting them. And I mean, I worked in not that long ago a small organisation where about sort of 10 employees and an owner, and luckily he was very open and he was the one who engaged me. No one was talking. They were either swearing, shouting or crying, and it was a really unhealthy, sad environment, and it used to be good. And the only way they could move forward was really to talk about how they felt. In the end, you know, I did one-on-ones with each of the staff members and the owner, and I found out their perspective on what was happening. And, you know, there was some change. They were overworked, a new person had come in, and you know, there were various kind of perceptions of this person has taken over and he doesn't value us anymore, and his perception was they're too sensitive and I need to focus on the future. And there was all this disconnect, and it was quite amazing. Within 2 weeks, everything turned around just from each of them having the one-on-one with me to talk about how they felt. And we did a facilitated discussion with the owner and each employee, and then we did 2 team sessions where we provided all the information obtained from everyone about the key challenges people were experiencing, and the owner then acknowledged the parts where he hadn't done so well. And after that, I mean, it was interesting. He said, I said, how's it going? 2 weeks later, he goes, amazing. He goes, they're all chirping like birds. And and that was from that need to express what had happened and the clarifying of what really was the story. So everyone had their own story and their own theory of it and their own reasons for feeling hurt and unvalued and dismissed. And once everything was cleared, they could move forward, and it's still going really well now. So there's hope sometimes if we use our words.
Yeah, so I think my final question to you is, say, if someone doesn't have the opportunity to reach out to someone like you, and maybe the workplace culture isn't such that there is that support or something like that, what is the one thing that everyone should be better at doing that can help solve conflict and turn things around, even if it's just for themselves?
Yeah.
Is that something that we can do for ourselves? I'm a big fan of just helping ourselves when nothing else can be done. There's always the exit strategy. I learned that one as well.
Yeah, no, look, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do ourselves, and I think, I mean, that's when I work with individuals, that's really the focus, actually. So it's kind of, it's getting an overall sense, almost like sort of taking a step back and saying, okay, what is happening between me and this other person? How long has it been going for? What is like the conflict sequence? Like, what happens each time? You know, what happens before, what happens during each part, and then how does it end? And trying to get a little bit of perspective of that. And if I have really intense emotions, where are those intense emotions coming from? I mean, even with situations where, say, there's a really difficult person and everyone finds them challenging, we all bring a different part of ourselves to that challenge. So what part of that intensity is a reasonable response to a challenging situation, and what part is clashing against my values or what I've gone through, is bringing me back to something I went through, say, when I was a child or in my own trauma. And often when we're in that intensity, that is the bit we need to explore to reduce that. And so exploring that can then allow us to get to a place of acceptance. So one of the things I see quite regularly is this kind of circling around about this person's bad, this person's irritating, this is what they do, this is what they did this time. So you can spend, like I do coaching sessions where sometimes I feel that if I didn't redirect it, we could spend days talking about how irritating that person is. And I mean, like, I know that that's quite enjoyable on occasion, but it doesn't get us to the place where we have acceptance, and acceptance is the foundation for change. So that place of acceptance is, I don't like this, this is awful, this person challenges me, this is what I'm dealing with, what can I do here to respond? And the other bit is the self-awareness part of, if I'm feeling this intensely and I'm this challenged, it means that I'm going to be responding differently to that person. So I'm already contributing to a more intense conflict because they bring their challenge behaviours, and then I'm bringing my response, and then they're responding to my response and I'm responding to their response. So we're already getting that escalation. So the moment we can go to that place of, what do I bring? Let me stand back and see this intensity. for what it is sort of in its totality. And it can be like, even for me, that helps me sometimes. I'm feeling like an intense response to this. What value is this clashing against? So it can be, I feel they dismiss me and they don't value my work. A really important value for me is to be heard and valued and listened to, and I'm not getting that. And that's also really important because when I was young, I didn't get listened to and valued, for example, someone might say. So once we get that bigger picture, there's an opportunity for our own growth and learning, and then a way forward, not just in that relationship, but in all of our relationships and how we manage them. And I think the other little bit is thinking about like small little steps we can take. So this is a really intense kind of dynamic I have with this person. I don't like it like that. What bit of who I am can I bring that will make this, even in a small way, better? Because we don't want to have bring our values down to meet someone else's behaviour. We want to bring the best of ourselves, and how do we do that? So there are lots of explorations we can do just with ourselves to manage those challenging emotions. Yeah,
I love that. So that's kind of where I was referring to a person being below the line, like within, like their internal landscape being below the line, so how they react. That's exactly where I was, what I was referring to. And so would you ask a person those questions, like first off when you're working with individuals, when they are having a strong reaction to someone? Will you work with them? These are some of the questions you're going to ask them to sort of see what's happening. That's amazing. That's exactly what I wanted to get out of this conversation.
Yeah. That's exactly the kind of questions I will ask, and I'll also, give feedback. Like I did this recently with a coaching client, and I said, what I've noticed is you're really circling around all the bits of what this person does and how they are, and we could talk for hours and hours about that. I'm just wondering, what is that intensity for you, and what does it connect to within yourself? And that opened up a whole conversation about, her values, her history, what it meant for her, what she'd experienced previously, and that was the unfolding of the insight.
That's awesome. That's so good. Thank you so much for that. That was really valuable. I hope that someone listening to this would have stopped and grabbed the pen and started to write down all of those really important self-reflection questions, I guess, because that was just gold. That was really good.
Thanks, Marcia.
I knew I was bringing just the right person to talk about this. Thank you so much, Tulsi. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And I'll see you around.
Yeah. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. The Turnaround Talk Show and Podcast is brought to you by Marcia Tepperman. You can find me on my website, www.marciatepperman.com.au, or you can connect with me on social media via Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to being with you again soon.